when you're walking around in San Francisco, you see these crazy people talking to themselves, and you're like, what is it like inside their heads, and how fun would it be to jump inside and see what's going on, who they're talking to, and or if you meet someone who's got some strange personality, like you just know that it's represented in their head in some crazy ways.
Ah yes, video games and stories. A marriage most people don't expect. Indeed, video games are probably one of the more underappreciated vehicles of storytelling. Games like The Last of Us, Vex, and a Sly trilogy have proven that video games can tell memorable narratives. However, what often goes overlooked is the method as to how they tell the tale. Tim Shafer's Psychonauts was a very unique way to tell a story because of how the game utilized its level design to supplement its narrative. Usually the story is separate from the gameplay, but since Psychonauts delves into the brains of different individuals, the stages serve as a means to develop said character. From an artist's obsession with bullfights, to a loser haunted from his lineage with Napoleon, playing through the levels that are the landscape of their minds help the player gain a better understanding of their condition that isn't as obvious when first meeting them. Ultimately, in both the neurotypical and mentally ill, Tim Shafer bolsters the narrative of Psychonauts by using level design as a mean of communicating the themes of how trauma is expressed. So the first minds the game introduces us to are that of Sasha, Oleander, and Mila. Most of these brains, at an initial glance, seem based upon a linear characteristic that defines them. Since Oleander is a general, his mind is a war-torn battlefield. Biplanes fly across the sky, while explosions incinerate some of the students randomly. Many of the mental figments are that of soldiers climbing ladders or blimps soaring across the field. Overall, it reflects a war that is akin to the militaristic-like personality Oleander adopts. In a similar fashion, Mila's mind is made up of an ongoing party. Since she's one to have a bubbly personality, you'll see flashing lights, a bouncer that mans the party, and a disco ball rotating in the center of some rooms. Additionally, Raz learns the levitation power-up, which is meant to relate back to Mila's more energetic character. Finally, Sasha's mind is pure empty space. Considering he speaks in a dull, stoic tone of voice, the void fits this perfectly to represent the lifelessness of his personality. The only thing breaking that nothingness is the cubic mass representing the ground they stand on. Also, this is the mind where Raz learns the Psi Blast ability, reflecting the concentrated, focused man that Sasha comes across as. All these minds correlate to the dominant trait within these characters, and to reflect their neurotypical nature, most of their levels are designed linearly to complete. However, small details reveal not all is well with these brains. Most of them carry a trauma that can only be noticed with a careful eye. Entering the snowfield in Oleander's mind will reveal little bunnies hopping about. This, of course, is very discordant with everything we've seen up to this point in his mental landscape, possibly hinting at something darker within his subconsciousness. Furthermore, Oleander carries two mental safes. The first one he leaves out in the open, basically being nothing more than a relay of his victories. The second one, however, is hidden away behind mental cobwebs, almost as if he either wanted to conceal it or hadn't visited that area in a while. This memory vault reveals Oleander getting kicked out of several military institutions. While this doesn't quite go into the traumatic experiences we see at the end of the game, it does indicate he has something to hide. Also, I must mention that from time to time, among the many figments of soldiers and tanks, Raz will collect a figment that resembles a cleaver. Yeah, not quite something you'd expect from a soldier. While his mind might display a war zone that goes along with his military background, little details might show cracks in his psyche that aren't coherent with this setting. In a similar way, the empty space in Sasha's mind covers the real trauma that lies beneath. Several switches regulate his brain, however, Raz overloads the levers, which breaks the facade of the empty space and reveals the turbulent childhood memories of Sasha. From what I can tell, a lot of his trauma is related to working in a shoe factory, as seen with the shoe boxes lying around, as well as the tape measure Raz grinds on. The memory vaults hold the images of Sasha as a baby watching his mother die, and as a teenager fleeing from his dad, explaining the repressed nature he has. Because these memories are just so painful for him to hold, he tries to bury them. However, as he explains it,
well, no. Actually, if you try to completely suppress your undesirable feelings, they'll build and eventually explode.
So yeah, the introverted, reserved nature of Sasha deceptively kept away some of his more traumatic experiences. Ultimately, his quiet nature has less to do with his actual personality and more to do with his refusal to face his demons, which is represented by the giant censor you fight as a boss. But what about Mila's brain? There's no way a person with so much levity can be internally tortured deep down, right? Well, leaving the party and levitating over to a side pathway will reveal a room with a chest. Entering into it will transport Raz to a chamber with several nightmares blocked off by a gate. The floor and walls are red hot, causing them to cry out in despair, asking why Mila abandoned them. Their screaming becomes so loud that it'll drown out Mila's own voice.
Darling, what are you doing down here? The party is upstairs. Lucky for you, I have my nightmares under control. These things can take you to a world of pain, trust me. Now quick, let's get back to the party, okay?
Darling, if you're looking for the makeup room, you've come to the wrong place.
While this isn't as drastic as Sasha, it does serve as a big contrast from the party-like persona we've come to know Mila for. As the memory vault showed, the extroverted, fun-loving Mila also carries painful memories of orphans under her care burning to their death. However, because she has her nightmares under control, such trauma is buried deep within her subconsciousness. Not only do these interesting finds in Mila, Sasha, and Oleander make for some interesting level designs, but they also allow the player to explore them as characters. Even though they seemingly have one trademark trait attributed to them, these minute details found throughout the levels develop them further and help understand a different side to them that they'd rather not show in the real world. While on the surface, Sasha is an unfeeling man, unleashing his inner demons show how this mere stoicness conceals the hardship of his past. Mila's cheeriness deflects the loss she feels for losing her children. And Oleander, well, we'll get to him later. The level designs describe the themes Shafer was trying to display. Despite the image of normalcy most neurotypical people try to convey, deep down, they themselves might be affected by trauma. Running through the straightforward path in Mila, Sasha, and Oleander's brain might make you conclude their minds are fine and under control, but going off the beaten path will reveal there's more than meets the eye. But what about the mentally ill? What about the brains unable to function properly? Raz himself gets to see this as soon as he suspects children's brains being stolen. His journey takes him out of the safety of Whispering Rock and into what Joseph Campbell describes as the wilderness. He encounters a mutated, brainwashed lungfish named Linda, a schizophrenic guard named Boyd, a bipolar actress named Gloria, a patient haunted by Napoleon named Fred, and an OCD artist named Edgar. Each of these brains also manifests trauma, but unlike the past three brains Raz has been in, the trauma is so bad that it takes over and contorts the individual's mind. The level design reflects such distortion by making gimmicks that represent their condition. So for instance, Linda the Lungfish is brainwashed by Coach Oleander. In order to present this, Coach Oleander tries to sway the citizens of Lungfishopolis with propaganda that Raz, who is a hulking giant in Linda's mind, codenamed Gagalore, is out to destroy them, therefore turning the military and other defense mechanisms against him.
The peaceful city of Lungfishopolis is under attack tonight by a hideous, gigantic monster the terrified citizens have named Gagalore. The Navy has responded quickly and decisively, dispatching its entire tank division to neutralize the creature. Soon, authorities say, everything will return to normal or better. Kidnapping human children is good.
It shows how Raz misunderstood the Lungfish. Previously, the boss fight mostly showed Raz in the position of fleeing from Linda. Shafer expertly illustrates this with the chase being in Linda's viewpoint in order to show how puny Raz was in comparison. However, going into Linda's mind reveals the vulnerability she had. When Raz realizes how much bigger he is in her perspective, it shows that he hadn't seen the full picture of her background. In fact, opening some of the memory safes will show that she was an ordinary lungfish until Oleander captured and enlarged her. Raz then starts to empathize with her and gain a fuller understanding of her experiences that weren't evident when they first encountered one another. In turn, Linda gains trust in him to defeat Coach Oleander, now in the guise of Coach Amara, and break the hold he had on her brain. This theme of not seeing the full picture of an individual gets further developed in the other minds. Initially, meeting Boyd will cause one to believe there are a couple of loose screws in his brain and that the Milkman is a separate entity that lies within the Thorny Tower's asylum.
Where's the Milkman?
I'll bet he's sleeping on the job. His milk is delicious. Everybody wants it. He'll be here soon. Then the lies will end.
However, going into his brain will reveal a series of winding roads and street guards known as the G-Men interrogating about the Milkman, which turns out to be an alter ego of Boyd that is asleep somewhere in his mental landscape. Along the way, he'll run into some Girl Scouts known as the Rainbow Squirts roaming around, but something doesn't look right about them, especially considering how secretive they are with their operation, which they state is to protect the Milkman.
To promote niceness, to make the world prettier, to share candy with everyone, to obfuscate the true nature of the Milkman, to protect the Milkman at all costs.
Boyd's mind is meant to display a schizophrenic brain. In particular, paranoia schizophrenia, considering the level design involves you making your way past much surveillance. Although, several memory vaults reveal that he's also a victim of hypnosis by Oleander. Paranoid schizophrenia involves the subject believing they're being chased, watched, or plotted against by another, and Boyd's mind exemplifies this when he seems to state there's a puzzle to be solved with the missing identity of the Milkman.
Almost complete. Just a few missing pieces.
Yes, now, which piece talks about the Milkman? The one who opens the asylum gate?
But it's all about the Milkman. Can't you see?
The G-Men represent the constant insecurity of Boyd, so in order to progress, Raz must make use of several symbols to blend in with them. If there were G-Men with street signs, Raz would have to use a street sign to cross into their territory. If there were G-Men with telephones, then Raz would have to use a telephone to enter into their area. Also, unlike Mila, his nightmares run rampant, pulling Raz into the ground at certain points. This shows that his nightmares are not under control, representing the disorder and chaos running his mind. As a side note, the G-Men will also make some cryptic comments. I'm not 100% sure of what this is supposed to mean. Either Boyd is simply crazy, or these remarks could be little snippets of his past that could be pointing towards a difficult childhood.
For the last several years, I have relied on prescription medication to make it through the days. When my husband drinks excessively, I may threaten him with this rolling pin, though we still love each other very much.
This is the only mind where Raz doesn't fix the cognitive disorder of the character. He merely awakens his alter ego to Milkman. Still, the level develops Boyd as a character because it provides more insight into his schizophrenic condition by utilizing light stealth elements with a twisted level layout to describe the symptoms he's enduring. In a similar manner, the levels that make up the minds of Fred Bonaparte, Edgar, and Gloria also exemplify forms of mental illness through their level designs. On the outside, Fred, Gloria, and Edgar are fighting something. For Gloria, it seems as if her personality changes depending on whether or not she's standing in the light, as seen when her gratitude of Raz finding her old trophy turns into anger when she stepped out into the darkness. For Fred, he seems to go back and forth in what appears to be a fight for control between him and Napoleon Bonaparte. And Edgar can't seem to stop painting bullfights over his drawings, frustrating him. But the individual level designs show more detail than what's on the surface. For Edgar, he's struggling to build a tower made out of queens to his ex-girlfriend, Lampida Bassionato. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the rest of the cards to finish it. Furthermore, the bull El Odio continues to knock it down every time he tries again. Therefore, Raz needs to journey around the city of Velvetopia to collect the cards, which are being held by Edgar's past wrestling teammates, all the while trying to avoid El Odio, which is charging around Velvetopia and scaring away other supposed civilians like the dog painters. This ultimately shows how Edgar refuses to let go of his past. The fact that each of the wrestlers that held the Queen were teammates that turned on him for losing the championship shows how Edgar's refusal to move on has stunted his growth. The bull El Odio, which means to hatred in Spanish, ultimately further demonstrates this. One of the memory vaults shows that Edgar was represented by the bull in his wrestling team. The fact that El Odio is depicted as an angry bull that friends away the other dog artists shows that a personal trauma that he had of his high school memories, which mainly involved Lampita cheating on him, consumed so much of his mind that it pushed away the other areas that made up his mental landscape, such as the dog artists. In fact, this is demonstrated in-game. Whenever Raz gets hit by El Odio, he's usually sent back several miles from whence he came, in some ways symbolizing how Edgar, clinging onto his past, keeps him from progressing. In fact, to add more to his regression, going into the sewers of his mind will reveal his past high school gym locker room. Kind of like how Sasha kept all his traumatic experiences buried underneath his subconsciousness, Edgar similarly represses all the lost years he spent in high school in the bottom layer of his mind, almost as if he'd rather forget they even existed. It's interesting how you can hear the bull above you as you walk around in the sewers, almost as if to represent how Edgar's anger has trampled these memories to a place where he'd never have to remember them again. For Gloria, her mother's suicide has caused her to have different mood swings. Depending on which layer the spotlight is on, the play showing in the center will change the environment, with her good side having happy children dancing around, while her dark side having them all attack Raz. In the midst of all this, there's a critic that non-stop attacks the play and keeps Bonita Soleil, the main actress of the show and the light needed to stabilize Gloria's mood, from coming out to act because of his scathing attacks. Initially, he doesn't seem like anything else except a nuisance. However, he represents all the negative abuse and life events Gloria went through, including being bullied by teachers at drama school and hearing about her mother killing herself. This is further established by the twist at the end of the level when it turns out he's the Phantom that was sabotaging the play all this time and being responsible for Gloria's mood swings. Considering that Gloria's mind represents bipolar disorder, certain scenarios will play out differently depending on which mood she is in. Considering that Raz is the director of the play, he sometimes needs to play certain scenes in different settings in order to progress through Gloria's mind.
Let's do Goodbye Haggis at home once more, okay?
Yeah, that one can use a little work.
As for Fred, his entire mind is structured around a battle for control between him and Napoleon, as represented by the board game in the center. As his memory vaults signify, he's become so accustomed to losing that he refuses to put an ounce of effort, and the general apathy of each of the game pieces reflect this, all of them feeling a sense of frustration with the fact Fred has given up. It's revealed in the memory vaults that he was once a respectable therapist in the Thorny Towers Asylum, and a sympathy for another patient named Crispin caused him to play a game of Waterloo. However, after losing 27 times to Crispin, he couldn't tolerate the sense of defeat, which caused Napoleon Bonaparte to haunt him ever since. Since Fred's trauma is based around losing in a board game, the entire level is based around such concept. Raz will get to use his own telekinesis to move the pieces on the board in order to repair bridges or defeat some of the other forces of Napoleon. It's a neat gimmick that also demonstrates how obsessive Fred is towards his losses at the Waterloo board game. Napoleon Bonaparte, his opponent and supposed distant relative, appears in spirit and constantly berates him for his lack of effort in honoring his lineage, ultimately representing the inner voice that dampens self-confidence. It was difficult to say, but it does appear as if Fred suffers from some form of anxiety disorder or PTSD based on the fact that his past losses at a board game affect him so deeply that he cannot function properly anymore. In order to help these individuals, the levels have Raz act as an engineer to help these people overcome their personal trauma causing their broken state of mind. For Edgar, He defeats all the wrestlers haunting him in order to collect all the cards so that Edgar could get to the top to face his own personal demons. Once there, Raz is able to reveal to Edgar how his preconceived notions of Lampida, the Matador, and El Odio were not based on reality and were in fact pathetic things to obsess over.
It's all right. It's okay. We'll win the game some other day.
Please. Edgar, look at them. They're too pathetic to hurt you anymore. Can't you just let it go?
How embarrassing. I can't believe I was hung up for so long over these losers.
For Gloria, Raz had to walk through her entire life by finding different playbooks across the multiple scenes in the show. All these scenes represent fragmented parts of Gloria's past in the theater school. In one sense, what Raz does here is very similar to trauma-focused psychotherapies, in which the therapy concentrates on your memory of the traumatic event and what it means to you. By linking together scenes of her past, Raz is able to move different settings into right place so that he could reach the hot air balloon and expose the critic for who he really was, which is the equivalent of a therapist helping a patient figure out what is behind the symptoms they suffer from. For Fred, Raz needs to give him a reason to persevere against Napoleon. By bringing out Fred's more positive qualities like giving money to a peasant or providing a meal to a cook, Raz was able to provide him with the motivation Fred needed. The level design has Raz go about this by having him go back and forth between the size of the board game and his original height and talking to the different pieces about what they need before going to Fred to have him deliver. This is very similar to talk therapy, which has the psychiatrist discuss with a patient in order to help work through their problems. The more times Fred fulfilled a request, the more encouraged he felt to fight against Napoleon's control and win. On a side note, I find it interesting how Napoleon simply fades away while giving Fred some encouragement instead of serving as a fully fledged boss fight at the end. It kind of makes me feel as if Napoleon wasn't truly a malignant force in Fred's brain, unlike the Matador to Edgar or the critic to Gloria. I don't know, just something I noticed. Ultimately, the minds of the Thorny Tower Asylum patients were nothing like that of Sasha, Mila, and supposedly Oleander. For while the trauma of the latter was buried underneath and kept in check, the individuals at the asylum had memories and experiences that damaged their mental landscape, and Shafer is not just simply able to express this with the writing, but also with how the level designs play out in each of the brains. But what about Raz? All this time, he has been venturing into minds of others. What about his own? Constantly throughout the game, he drops little hints of his past.
Do you want to talk about it?
It's a long story. Maybe later.
Okay, I'm always here for you, darling. Let me just say that it's very normal for boys your age.
Yeah.
Talk about baggage.
Tell me about it. And the weird thing is, I'm pretty sure he's actually psychic himself.
However, not a whole lot is actually known except that he ran away from home to become a psychonaut, whom his father despised. But it isn't until the end, when Raz and Oleander's minds fuse, that we truly get a taste of the painful memories. Inside, Raz finds himself in a circus filled with freakish clowns, a representation of his negative memories of being a trapeze artist. He also finds a young Oleander, whom he needs to defend from mutated popcorn bunnies while he chases his own rabbit. Now I know that a lot of people complain about this level, whether it be the young Ole non-stop bitching about his face,
My face!
or the low-pitched blaring voice crying, Rasputin, or how hard it is to land a hit on Oleander's dad, or how hard the platforming section is with Raz's dad. But you know what? In the grand scheme of things, it all works. Considering that Raz and Oleander's minds are combined, the length and difficulty of the level really solidify the chaos that the trauma of these brains is causing. While Kid Oleander is indeed annoying and insufferable, he kind of represents the vulnerability that isn't so obvious in the mind of Oleander, not too dissimilar to Linda. Now, all the little hints seen in the tutorial all make sense in this level. The bunnies hopping around in the snow indicated his love for rabbits as a child, and the fact they were being gunned down represents how his dad butchered bunnies for meat. Considering the main objective of this level is to protect little Ole from his dad, it shows a more sympathetic side to Oleander, as well as an explanation for his draconian personality. At the same time, you get a better understanding behind the character of Raz. Up until now, we've always seen him as someone who is brave and defiant, willing to plunge his head into any danger. So for the first time, we see him in a position of weakness, being berated by his father. The level design helps describe the pressure Raz is under, the many hoops he has to swing on and jump over while the water threatens to engulf him, and his father insults him, truly demonstrates the trauma he only hinted about till now. But then something interesting happens, for after traversing so far into his subconsciousness, he encounters his real dad, and it was there Raz realized that his traumatic version of his father was a misunderstanding. Now, I do wish the game would have explained as to why Rasputin got the idea his father was over-exasperating, but at the same time, it is a heartwarming moment. But anyway, there's a lot to say with Meat Circus, for not only do we gain a greater insight of Oleander and sympathy for the villain, but it also further develops the character of Raz. Never before have we seen Raz scared or placed in a weaker position, and the overall difficulty and length of Meat Circus reflects the combined overbearing trauma of Raz and Oleander. Overall, Shafer interweaved a lot of themes into Psychonauts, including not judging someone based on their outward appearance, as well as a greater understanding of mental illness. However, the real beauty has less to do with the actual themes, and more to do with how it's presented. The way Psychonauts integrates level design to supplement its themes is an innovative way of storytelling. Not only is it a phenomenon the movies and books have yet to replicate, but it's also one that shows the overlooked potential games have in telling stories. The myriad of bizarre minds Psychonauts takes you through demonstrates the true ingenuity behind its level design. And, well, I don't want to drag this out. Thanks for making it this far in the video, and I'll see you guys next time.